Hi, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. I'm your host, Becca. I'm a certified personal trainer, holistic health coach, and future chiropractor on my way to figuring out this thing we called life. Now, let's get babbling. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Becca Babbles podcast. I'm your host, Becca, and today we're going to be talking all about the Hadza Tribe, an exercise paradox, and why you may not be losing weight even though you're eating so little calories, yet you're on the treadmill for forever and ever and ever, and why it just seems like nutrition is so complicated and our metabolism is so complicated. If any of those things you relate to, this is the podcast for you, because I got so excited in my nutrition masters this week. We were talking about energy availability and just energy systems, and one of the projects that we had to do was read this article that was called The Exercise Paradox. And it was about this researcher. His name is Pontzer, or Herman Pontzer, and he went to go and study the Hadza Tribe. And if you've heard about like metabolic adaptation and all these things, you've probably heard of this study before, but she wanted us to do a research paper or read this article and then build like another essay on top of this and have a project and stuff. So I was like, this is podcast material. So I wanted to give you guys this information because I thought it would be really useful, especially with the new year coming up and everyone having their New Year's resolutions and just being like, this is the year. This is the year that I'm committed to my health, and I'm either going to lose the weight, build the muscle, or whatever else you have in mind. This may help you actually set yourself up for success, because I know so many people that fail after fail and they get frustrated, and it doesn't have to be this way. It is not just move more, eat less. That's not how our body works. Our metabolism is a lot more complicated than that, and we need to give our bodies the respect that they are more than just calories in versus calories out. And I'm going to break that down to where it's understandable, because I feel like we either get one end of the spectrum where it's like super fluffy and it's just like, listen to your body, do what it needs, and like eat whatever you want. It's okay. Like your body will adapt. And then you got the other end of the spectrum where it's like, count every single calorie that you put into your mouth. You better be strength training every single day and getting into your zone 2 cardio space. And then you're just like, I'm just trying to create a habit of going to the gym because I didn't do that last year. So I'm going to break it down and make it less complicated, but also help explain like the science behind it in an easy, digestible way. So going back to this Hadza Tribe study, basically what had happened was the Herman decided to go and study the Hadza Tribe, and they're known for being foragers. They're a hunter and gather tribe, and the men would go out for like days and go and try and get resources, whether that be hunting down some sort of animal, finding another mostly I guess just like hunting animals, and then the females would be like gathering food and supplies and just keeping the tribe going and surviving. And so what they thought was going to happen was they were going to test their what's called your total daily expenditure, which is known as TDEE. And when they measured this, they had them drink this liquid that when they peed this liquid out, which I don't know how this works or how someone comes up with it, but whatever scientist is deciding to do this, props to them. But when they pee out that liquid, then they're able to measure that and see how many calories they're burning throughout the day. And so they were expecting them to like be burning so many calories. And what actually ended up happening was the men were burning about 2,600, and the women were burning about 1,900. And they were like, wait a second, this is the same amount of calories being burned by Westerners just sitting on their couch or doing their desk job, And that shocked them. And that like would shock me too, because what would make sense is they're out moving all day, doing all the things. They should be burning a lot of calories. But what's actually happening, and what makes more sense if you actually think about it, is why would our bodies adapt to just let us continue to just burn and burn and burn and burn calories and let us wither away? Because just a couple of years ago, we were gathering that food. We were having to be foragers, and we didn't have access to a lot of food. And so our metabolism had to adapt and be able to run efficiently without us withering away to dust, because we didn't have access to food, but we still needed to like procreate and build a society and survival to the fittest, pretty much. So then that begs the question, how does our metabolism adapt? How does it downregulate? And how am I able to sit here at this desk and burn about the same amount of calories as someone who's foraging all day long? And there used to be this theory of like how your total energy expenditure was viewed. There's either the additive or the constraint. And the additive was the idea that like the more activity that you do, the more calories you're going to burn. It just keeps being this like everlasting, like, will never stop. The other theory is this constraints theory, where it's like once you do a certain amount of activity, that calorie burn just kind of like caps off. And this makes sense because like if you've ever been that person who was like, okay, I'm going to start walking every single morning, and you decide to keep walking every single morning, and then you start losing weight and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm making the progress, I'm doing what I want to do. And then the next thing you know, you're not losing any weight. Or maybe you decided to cut your calories on top of that, and you're like, well, now I'm like also still not losing weight, and you just keep hitting plateau after plateau after plateau. This makes sense because your metabolism is starting to adapt. Now, I know there's some people on the internet that will say like, your metabolism is broken, or my metabolism is broken, and I don't know how to fix it, or how am I supposed to fix my metabolism, and all that stuff. And the thing is like, I don't want you coming from a mindset that you're broken, because you're not. Your body's just adapting, which means, thankfully, that our bodies can adapt the other direction. So typically what ends up happening is the reason why people say their metabolism is broken when it's not broken, it's just adapting to what you're doing to it. They're in what's called a low energy availability state, also known as LEA state. Typically what happens is you're doing a ton of activity, yet you're burning less and less calories. Or it's not burning, sorry. You're eating less and less calories. So when I had mentioned that these Hadza tribe was eating, the women were eating 1900 calories, there's quite a few of you who are listening to this podcast right now that are like, I don't even eat that much, which is concerning on another point. And that might be why you're struggling, because feeling good and energized and being a healthy person shouldn't be that hard. And it's because you've gotten your metabolism to a point where it's being as efficient as possible to be a human being. Now, there's a lot of things involved in your metabolism. And when people start talking about how like it's just calories in, calories out, there's a lot more to it than that. What can happen when you're in a low energy availability state is your BMR, which is what most people think of their metabolism, starts to decrease. So your BMR is your basal metabolic rate. This is when you're just laying on the couch all day, not even doing anything, and just being a human being, how much you would burn just there. And that's greatly affected by your thyroid hormone. Your thyroid hormone regulates your metabolism, tells your body what to do. It's kind of like this messenger, helps regulate a lot of your hormones. But when your thyroid doesn't have enough energy to create thyroid hormone, your basal metabolic rate starts to decrease. Another thing that starts to happen when you're in a low energy availability state is reproduction starts to go down, mental clarity starts to go down. You want that beautiful, clear skin, say goodbye to that as well. So all these things start to happen when your body doesn't have enough energy. So that's where some people start to say, okay, that must be why this Hadza tribe does like burns the same amount of calories as Westerners, is because their body's just trying to adapt to survive. So it's decreasing its thyroid hormone. It's not supplying as much energy to other systems that aren't as important. Like reproduction is important because we want to like grow our society, but survival of the fittest is going to be, I'm thinking about myself first and then reproduction later. That's why a lot of women tend to lose their period when they are not able to ovulate, when they're not eating enough. Another thing that comes into play when you're in a low energy availability state or just have a decreased BMR, well, actually, it's decreased total energy expenditure, is your NEAT starts to decrease. So NEAT stands for non-exercise, non-exercise, I can't remember what the A is. Thermodynamics is the T, but basically most people when they talk about this, you hear people talking about like, oh, you need to get your steps in, you need to get 10,000 steps, I'm getting in my NEAT, all these things. Like I am guilty of one of those people of saying I'm getting in my steps, because when you're a student all day and you're sitting down all day, you got to get in some movement somehow besides just the hour that you're in at the gym. It's important to move, it's important to get blood flow to your body, but your NEAT is more than just steps. Your NEAT can also be things like fidgeting around, like you see me moving my hands so much as I'm talking right now, or you changing your posture, or being able to maintain your posture. There was a study done in, it's the Minnesota starvation experiment, and they talk about a lot how like they're not able to like keep an upright posture, like they're always slouching or they're leaning against walls and stuff like that. That's because they were basically being starved and they were in a low energy availability state, and so their body was compensating by trying to be as efficient as possible and using other things to help them stand up. NEAT can also be you choosing to stand instead of sit, or like I had mentioned, lean up against the wall versus not lean up against the wall. So in a few of the studies that I did read, though, it did mention that NEAT isn't necessarily affected as much with like short bursts of exercise versus long bouts of exercise. So to me, they didn't necessarily specify what short versus long meant in the study, but to me, I'm thinking like, okay, you do a strength training session for like 45 minutes versus like when you're going for a run and you're running for a half a marathon, like I haven't even run a half a marathon. I've only run a 10K. And for me, that took me like almost an hour, I think. So I couldn't even imagine how much it would be running a half a marathon. Like that's definitely going to be long bouts of exercise. And I have this one friend who is running one, and she just talks about how she runs it in the morning and then she watches church online because she's like, I'm so tired when I get back, I just don't want to move. And so it makes sense, like when you're running for long periods of time, that your NEAT is going to decrease because your body has to conserve all that energy that you just used up running for long periods of time. So these are all things that are affected by having a low energy availability state and can then affect your total energy expenditure because it's being affected by your BMR. So I wish I had a pie chart up here. I want you to think about, because I've mentioned a lot of things, your BMR, your total energy expenditure, NEAT, and all these things. There's a few things that make up your daily expenditure. So BMR is actually your biggest chunk. Then it's going to be your NEAT. And then like a tiny little sliver is like how much you burn just consuming food on a daily basis. If you've ever heard people talk about like that protein is like 4 grams when you like calculate it, and then like I'm trying to remember what carbs are. I think carbs are 6, and then fat is 9 grams. No, I'm thinking of I'm thinking of how many calories. Anyways, there's a certain like where one type of macronutrient burns more than the other macronutrient. And protein has been known to be more of like you consume it and the cost of it is 4 grams, but technically it's 3 because of how much energy it uses to actually burn up that protein. And so that's another sliver of that pie when it comes to your total like energy expenditure. But the thing that most people think of when burning calories is how much they burn during exercise, which is a really small sliver. So keeping this in mind, when you're thinking about trying to lose weight, just increase your metabolic rate in general, which I advise higher than just trying to lose weight, is how can I increase my basal metabolic rate? And being in a low energy availability state is going to significantly affect your basal metabolic rate, because if your body thinks that it doesn't need or doesn't have access to food, it's not going to want to increase that basal metabolic rate, because then you would just wither away into dust. And there's one last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to like your body adapting to a certain metabolic rate that a lot of researchers are starting to get into. There's not a ton studied on this, but it's more of an idea, is your mitochondria being more efficient. And this might be the reason why when you start going off for a run and you start burning, let's say, 200 calories when you go for this run. Your body burns 200 calories on this run, and then you go for this run again. And then a couple of months pass, and you're still going for the same run at the same intensity. You're just going for this run. Now you start to only burn like 150 calories. Yet your Fitbit keeps telling you, nope, you're burning this like 200 calories. And so then you compensate by like eating, let's say, that 200 calories if you wanted to be at maintenance. Or you think that you are burning this extra 200 calories, so you're using that as like your deficit. But what's actually happening is your body is getting more and more and more efficient doing this exercise, because it's becoming easier and easier and easier. Now, this might just be because like your form's improving, your body is like adapting to this like path that you're going down, so it's used to it. But another thing could be your mitochondrial efficiency. So your mitochondria, everyone knows the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It creates what's called ATP. And this is a type of energy that your body uses, and it creates ATP through this process called oxidative phosphorylation. So how people can determine if your mitochondria is efficient or not is based off this phosphate to oxygen ratio. Basically what this means is like how many units of oxygen do you need to consume to produce a certain amount of ATP for energy. So the higher the ratio, the greater your mitochondrial efficiency is. Now, not all of the oxygen that you use will be used by your body to create ATP. A lot of it is lost through what's called protein leakage, and is used across like the mitochondrial membrane. And this will then result in like heat being lost rather than you actually being able to use and create this energy. So this can account for about like 20 to 25% of your resting metabolic rate. So to give you a general idea of like how this all works, the more efficient your mitochondria is, the higher the efficiency, the less protein leakage there will be, leading to then a lower energy expenditure. Now the reverse can be the same way, where if you have reduced mitochondrial efficiency, then this will cause an increase in protein linkage and then a increase in heat production, therefore then increasing mitochondrial rate. this, like, to me, I was like, wait a second, but you want like mitochondrial efficiency, or that's what like most people are talking about. So then I kind of got confused. But to make this make sense, and what I've discovered is that when you start exercising more and more and more, the body starts to become more efficient at that work because your mitochondria is able to produce more energy when you're doing that specific exercise. That's why it's so important to do something called progressive overload. And it's easier to do that with strength training versus running, because you can only run for so long or be on the elliptical so long or like go out to an all-out efficiency or intensity so much before you kind of just hit this like block of like, I can't do this anymore. Now again, there is so much more to this than just the efficiency of your mitochondria and the NEAT that you're doing and your thyroid hormone and all of that. These are all in combination of what could be affecting you in that process. So I want to circle back to the importance of muscle mass and strength training. So after reading this article that I had to do for my class, I wanted to go a little bit deeper. And so it mentioned some of the research that he had published for this. And so, of course, me being a nerd, I wanted to go into the research and kind of discover a little bit more of like what was some of the other stuff that he found. And in one of the research articles that he did do, he not only compared the Hadza tribe to average American and Westerners, but he also compared it to farmers. And what was really interesting to me is that the farmers had a little bit less body fat percentage than the average American, but had more than the Hadza tribe. But they also had more lean muscle mass, or what's called fat-free mass, which is basically everything encompassing besides the fat on your body, than the Hadza tribe. And so I was thinking, I was like, okay, how does this make sense? And two things came to mind. One, the Hadza tribe was taking a lot of steps. It was very low intensity work of just walking for long periods of time, not probably doing a ton of lifting. Besides, you could probably argue like the males were doing a lot of lifting because you have to like lift the dead animal to carry it back to your tribe. But probably not as much as like what a farmer would be doing. But not only that, farmers, like, you have the food on your land, you're not going out to go and get the food. So farmers probably had a little bit more access to food than the Hadza tribe did. So their ability to build muscle mass, but also maintain that muscle mass, was probably higher than the Hadza tribe, because not only are they sending the stimulus to build muscle, but they have the fuel and like tools in their body to build that muscle. And that's what's so important, is that ability to maintain and build up that muscle mass. And I know there's a few studies out there that say like lean muscle mass, yes, burns an extra couple of calories compared to like someone who doesn't. It's actually only about like 20 to 30 additional calories per day to your resting metabolic rate. But here's the other thing, is when you build muscle and you have extra lean mass on you, while you're doing more activities, you are burning more calories. So like, let's say here's me, and then I have an identical twin right next to me, except they have 5 pounds less of lean muscle mass than I do. They are going, if they did the same exact exercise as me, or exercise routine, they had the same amount of sleep, that let's say they like ate the same amount of food, they are still going to burn less during that bout of movement than I will, because I have an extra 5 pounds of muscle on me. Not only that, when you have more muscle mass on you, And let's filter out like the giant bodybuilders that like can't move or rotate and stuff, but like an average human who isn't on testosterone, or like giant amount of testosterone, you're going to move more. You're going to want to move more. I literally just read a research paper for one of my classes about patellofemoral pain syndrome, which basically just means like you have pain in your knee. What the biggest recommendation for that is knee dominant exercise, because a lot of times some people's pain is not stemming from like your knee being the issue or you not having enough range of motion in your hip. It's just stemming from the fact that like your body is loading your joints rather than loading your muscle, which is that tissue. And so when you have more muscle, you're able to load that muscle in like exercise or when you're walking down the street rather than your joints. So then you're going to have less pain, which then therefore means you're going to want to move more. And then the habits that come along with wanting to build muscle mass, you tend to become more active, more aware about your health and your body. So just focusing more on like building muscle is going to drastically change your life, not only from a resting metabolic state or basal metabolic rate state, but also just from your daily life in general. Not to mention the fact that like muscle also stores glycogen. So let's say like what's the next holiday? I don't know if this is going to come out in time before the Super Bowl comes out, but let's say you went to the Super Bowl or had a Super Bowl party and you had like drinks or you had like food that you typically don't eat and you had an extra couple of calories. All of that is going to go towards your muscle. All that glycogen is going to be stored in your muscle rather than just stored in your liver and making your liver take all that burden. And then it's probably then going to turn into fat. But if you have that extra muscle, it's then going to be used in the next workout that you do. And how exciting is that? Like, you have extra storage. And so you're able to go to events without being worried about, oh my goodness, should or should I not be eating this food that's right in front of me? Which that's another podcast for another day. But I hope you're getting what I'm saying here is that the importance of building muscle mass isn't just for the extra calorie burn, but it also like affects your entire life in general of just like you as a person. And you're not going to get big, bulky by just trying to focus on building muscle. No one becomes a bodybuilder overnight. I wish it was that way. Man, I've been trying to build my booty for like forever. And just now I feel like I've gotten to where it's like I've gone from flat butt to like, hey, there's something there. So like if you're ever worried about building muscle, I want you to try as hard as possible. And then you can finally be like, maybe I don't actually want to like focus on that specific area, but you can still build other parts of your body. There's such an empowering state to be like, I can just focus on building muscle and I can build this rather than trying to tear yourself down and just constantly try and lose weight. Now, I know I've talked about like low energy expenditure and like how the Hadza tribe like walked 25,000 plus steps every day. I don't want you to get the idea that movement is not important. I hope my statement about like how muscle actually makes you move more would clarify that. But sometimes when people get the message of like, oh, okay, steps don't matter, then all I just need to do is like go to the gym an hour a day and that's it. Wrong. Like, movement is not only important for the goals that you have, whether that is to build muscle, lose weight, whatever that is, but it's also important just like for your health as a human being. Movement, whether that is steps or mobility and stuff like that, is going to help with blood flow, lymph flow, your energy. I know when I'm sitting at school all day, my brain gets so clouded. And there was a point where I was at school last week, Granted, I'm also like under fluorescent lights when I'm at school. I'm like, I just need to get some vitamin D and get some movement. I am able to think so much clearer when I go outside for a bit and get some movement in rather than just forcing myself to sit and focus on the work that's in front of me. So daily movement is important, and your 1 hour workout isn't going to suffice for movement and for what your body needs. So, what should you do moving forward? Where should you go from here? If your goal this year was to lose a certain amount of weight or to build a certain amount of muscle, or, well, I hope I convinced you to change your goal to building a certain amount of muscle. But let's say it's just to improve your health overall. What should you do now? Your main goal should be build muscle. If you have a body composition goal that you have, it is so much easier to build and shape with muscle rather than constantly focusing on how much can I lose. Because not only will you be able to shape your body, but you'll actually be able to increase your calorie intake while you're building muscle. And so then you won't be stuck at this like 1200 calorie mark for the rest of your life, or 1500 calories for the rest of your life, because that is not where you need to be. And your mental state would be so much better if you just ate more. But again, another podcast for another time. So focus on building muscle. And then to do that, you're going to strength train at least 1 to 3 times a week. Full body strength train. I mean good full body strength training. None of this circuit stuff. None of this body weight circuit, Pinterest, ab exercise circuit stuff. We're done with that now. It's 2026. You're going to actually rest in between your sets and focus on adding weight to the bar. Either adding weight to the bar, adding reps to your sets, or adding sets. You're going to rest for a minimum of 1 minute to 3 minutes. And then you're going to redo the set again. You're going to focus on actually becoming stronger. Being that, like, if you watched like Wonder Woman, I know everyone was like super excited about that. Become your own Wonder Woman and think, how would she train? She wouldn't be doing the circuit stuff. She would be building muscle and like becoming a warrior. So like when you go into the gym, imagine yourself as becoming a warrior. Then not only will you strength train, you will also try and aim for 8,000 steps a day. Let's say you're stepping only 2,000 right now. That's totally fine. 8,000 might seem like a lot. Then just add 1,000 more. And then in 2 weeks, add another 1,000. And then in 2 more weeks, add another 1,000. Build up sustainable goals that make it easier that you can get these wins. So then this can actually be a lifelong thing that you do. Most studies show that you get most of the benefits from the steps around like 8,000 steps. So I know a lot of people talk about the 10,000 steps, but a lot of that comes from just like people saying that like, hey, we want you to reach this point knowing that you're probably only going to get to 8,000. So 10,000 is great. If you love your lifestyle around 10,000 steps, that's typically how much I get. Go for it. But if that stresses you out and you feel like you have to pace around your kitchen to get in that amount of steps, don't worry about it. Just aim for that 10,000 steps. And then I know right now it's like pretty cold in most states. Thankfully, I'm in Texas, so I get a little bit of like mostly warm weather. The wind is really cold here. But let's say it's super cold outside. That's okay. Just focus on mobility. Some sort of movement is going to be better than nothing. Remember, NEAT isn't just steps. NEAT is any other movement besides like planned movement, which like technically going for a walk or doing mobility is planned movement, but like NEAT is also fidgeting. NEAT is changing your posture. If you are sitting for long periods of time, try and stand if you have a standing desk. These are all going to change your position and increase the NEAT that you have. And then lastly, focus on hitting your protein intake. Remember, the Hadza tribe didn't have enough access to food, so they weren't able to build the muscle that they needed. The farmers, on the other hand, did. So yes, other macronutrients are important, and I would stress the importance of increasing your calories over time. But for right now, we're going to make it simple, easy, and you're just going to focus on hitting protein, getting 1 gram per pound of body weight. Shoot for that. And if you don't get that, that's okay. But we're going to shoot for the stars and land on the moon sort of situation. We're going to keep it easy, simple. And then we're going to build upon from there. So I hope this podcast was helpful for anyone who's like, I really want to try and get healthy this year, or I really want to change my mindset around the gym, or I really want to change the way that my body looks this year. I hope this gives you a better idea on how your metabolism works and how it can be affected, and that you can finally lose the thought of I need to do X amount to then burn X amount, because our metabolism is way more complicated than that. And building muscle is going to be way more impactful, not only for this short-term body composition goal that you have, but your overall life. So instead of thinking, how can I lose weight faster? Start asking yourself, how can I make it easier on my body to do so? That simple mind shift is going to drastically change your life. So if you have any other questions about this topic, as you can tell, I love talking about this topic, or maybe you have more questions or have a topic for that you want me to cover, you can either message me at Becca and Wellness on Instagram, or you can email me at beccababbles.podcast@gmail.com. I'd love to chat with you or answer any of your questions. And with all that being said, I can't wait to babble with you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Becca Babbles Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, the best thing that you can do is leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or any other listening platform of your choosing. If you want to learn more about me, you can do that by following me on Instagram at Becca and Wellness, or by checking out my blog, freebies, offers, and newsletter on my website at beccaandwellness.com. If you want to share the love of the podcast, you can do that by taking a screenshot and sharing it on social media and tagging me and the podcast at Becca and Wellness and using the hashtag Becca Babbles Podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I can't wait to babble with you next time.